Okay, so listeners, picture this. It's
Yeah.
December 15th, 2024, and the Middle East is, well, it's a whirlwind of change. Power shifts, alliances changing constantly. I bet you've got a stack of articles and timelines and reports about all this, right? But who actually has the time to go through all of it?
That's exactly why we're here, right?
Yeah, to break it down, make sense of it.
What I find so fascinating is how 2024 has been, well, completely unpredictable.
Right.
So we're going to, untangle the major events that have happened this year. We'll use that timeline of key developments you've got, and we'll really dig into why things happened the way they did.
The motivations, yeah.
Exactly. And of course, where things might go from here.
The potential fallout. It's like watching a geopolitical thriller unfold in real time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to get a grip on where we are now, we got to go back to, well, the trigger, the Hamas attack on Israel back in October 2023. That really threw everything into chaos, didn't it?
It did. It really shattered any hope for stability that the Abraham Accords had tried to create. Remember those? They were supposed to, bring in a new era of cooperation. But the attack, well, showed just how deep these tensions run and the scale of it. Over 1,200 Israelis killed. It triggered a massive retaliation from Israel, of course, in Gaza. And as we know, that conflict spilled over, right, into Lebanon, Yemen. Hezbollah got involved, the Houthi rebels.
Pulled everyone in.
Yeah, by January this year, 2024, the whole region was ready to explode.
It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, wondering if things would get even worse.
Yeah.
And then things took an even stranger turn, with those reports about Israel planting devices in Lebanon, like disguised as electronics.
Oh, right.
Sounded like something out of a spy movie.
What's the real story there? Well, that incident shows you just how shadowy, how secretive intelligence operations are in this conflict. The details are still kind of murky, but it looks like Israel was carrying out covert actions, targeting Hezbollah. It was a calculated move to, I think, disrupt their operations, cut their supply lines. But of course, it made things even worse, increased tensions with Hezbollah.
So Israel's been taking a much tougher stance, some might say aggressive, like they were pushed into a corner and decided to come out swinging.
Yeah.
But they also saw an opportunity in all the chaos happening in Syria, right? That timeline you mentioned, it shows the Assad regime collapsing just this month, December 2024.
Yeah, that's right. The fall of Assad was a huge turning point. It created this massive power vacuum in Syria. And Israel, well, they didn't waste any time. They moved into the Golan Heights buffer zone, basically ripped up that 1974 disengagement agreement that had kept things relatively peaceful for decades.
Bold move. I mean, while everyone was watching the conflict in Lebanon, Israel was quietly redrawing the map in Syria. But the sources you put together, they suggest the international community wasn't too happy about this. Was this a rogue move by Israel?
Well, it definitely raised some eyebrows globally, that's for sure. A lot of concern was expressed, yeah. But Israel has defended what they did. They say they're just acting in their own best interests, trying to prevent hostile groups from getting a foothold in the region. I mean, with Syria in chaos, there's a real risk of groups like Hezbollah or even more radical factions taking advantage. So Israel claims they're trying to get ahead of that threat, but whether it'll actually bring stability or make things worse, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, it's a risky move, no doubt. But you have to remember, Israel isn't the only one making big plays in this whole mess. We can't ignore Iran, right? Especially their decision to fire missiles straight at Israel this year. That's not how they usually operate, is it?
No, not at all. For years, they've used these proxy groups, right?
Yeah.
Hezbollah in Lebanon, those Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthis down in Yemen, that's been their go-to move. But Assad collapsing?
Yeah.
That really messed things up for them.
It did.
Their supply lines to Hezbollah were cut. Their proxies all over the region, they've been weakened.
Exactly. It forced them to change their tactics. Couldn't rely on those proxies the same way anymore. And then, in October, boom, we see those missile strikes aimed directly at Israel. It was a statement, wasn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. Saying, hey, we're still a major player here, and we're not afraid to get involved directly.
That's it.
It was a wake-up call for
Sure.
sure. But this new approach, it raises so many questions. I mean, what does this mean for the region becoming more stable? It feels like we've entered a whole new phase of the conflict.
It's a dangerous escalation, that's for sure. Potential for mistakes on both sides. But to really understand the consequences, we need to look at the countries stuck in the middle of all this. Lebanon and Syria, for example. Your sources, they paint a grim picture of what's happening there, don't they?
It's really tough to see, honestly. Lebanon is really suffering. Their economy was already in bad shape. And this Israeli incursion has just devastated the south. People displaced, struggling to get basic supplies. It's a full-blown crisis.
Yeah, Lebanon's dealing with so many problems at once. Economic collapse, their government's paralyzed, and now this conflict on top of it all. They're right on the edge. And then you have Syria, basically a patchwork of different groups, all fighting for control, ripe for exploitation, you might say.
You mentioned reading about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, right?
Yeah.
Who are they exactly? What are they doing in all this chaos?
I was curious about them, too. Well, from what I've read, they're an Islamist faction, HTS for short. They've been gaining power in Syria, especially since Assad fell. They control a good chunk of territory, mainly in the northwest. The sources I looked at, they say their relationship with other rebel groups is kind of complicated. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they fight each other. And their ideology, it seems to be based on a very strict interpretation of Islam. You've got it. HTS rising like this, it's a direct result of the power vacuum in Syria. They've taken advantage of the chaos, carved out their own territory, their ideology, their goals. It just adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. And their presence, well, it raises some big questions. What does this mean for Syria's future? Will they stabilize things, or will they just make things even more fragmented and violent?
You're listening to Echoes of Insight, where we dive deep into the topics shaping our world, from the planet and politics to health, consciousness, economy, and alternative lifestyles. If you're enjoying the journey, make sure to subscribe and share this podcast with others who love exploring new perspectives.
So much to think about. But it's not just about those directly involved, right?
Yeah.
What about the countries on the sidelines, the ones watching but still deeply affected by everything happening? Egypt, for instance. They've always tried to be the mediator in the region, haven't they?
That's right. They've always positioned themselves as the voice of reason, especially between Israel and Palestine. They've been pushing for a peaceful solution, talking to everyone involved, but they also know how easily this instability could spill over into their own country.
Walking a tightrope.
Yeah, trying to keep things stable, both at home and in the wider region. Tricky balance.
Absolutely. But what about Turkey? They've always been a bit unpredictable.
You can say that again. They're definitely using the current situation to their advantage. They've increased their military presence in northern Syria, making sure they have a stake in the region, and they're playing a clever game. Keeping good relations with Russia, but also keeping an eye on the U.S.
It seems like everyone's trying to make deals, get themselves into a good position, while the whole Middle East is being reshaped. But in all of this, where does that leave the ordinary people living in these countries? The people caught in the middle of these power struggles. What are their lives like? What does the future hold for them?
That's the question we should always be asking, right? The human cost of all this is huge. We're talking millions of people displaced, living in terrible conditions as refugees, either in neighboring countries or within their own. Their lives have been turned upside down, homes destroyed, no way to make a living, no idea what the future holds. It's a humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah, it really makes you think. We're talking about all these political moves, military strategies, but it's the people on the ground who are paying the price.
That's why we always have to remember those human stories. We can't just talk about alliances and troop movements, right? We have to think about the people caught in the middle of all this, the people whose lives have been turned upside down, their stories, their resilience. That's what really shows the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah, it's sobering. But in all this turmoil, is there any hope for things getting better? Is there any chance of a more peaceful future for the Middle East?
That's the million-dollar question. It's complicated, and there are no easy answers. But even in the darkest times, there are always people working for peace, trying to make things better. You'll see them mentioned in your sources. Grassroots groups working for peace, interfaith dialogue, aid organizations helping people get what they need, women's groups fighting for their rights and empowering their communities.
Those efforts don't always make the news, but they're important, aren't they? Like planting seeds of hope.
They are. They show us that even with all these challenges, people still want peace, they want to heal, they want to build a better future.
It's inspiring. But to really make a change, we need a multi-pronged approach, right? Addressing the humanitarian crisis, getting political dialogue going, supporting economic development so people can build stable lives.
You've got it. It's about addressing the root causes, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms. It's about creating a fair system where everyone has a chance to prosper. But what about the international community? Can they actually make a difference in a region as complex and volatile as this?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. But I think they have a responsibility to act both individually and as a group. That means providing aid, supporting efforts to build peace, and holding people accountable for any atrocities that have been committed. It's about using their influence to encourage dialogue, cooperation, and create an environment where peace can actually take root.
So aid, diplomacy, and accountability. But it's not just about top-down solutions, right? What about ordinary people like us, people who are worried about what's happening in the Middle East? Can we do anything to make a difference?
I truly believe we can. Never underestimate the power of individual action. Every effort counts, no matter how small. We can donate to organizations working on the ground, volunteer our time, learn about what's happening and tell others, and push for policies that promote peace and justice.
So using our voices, our resources, whatever we have, to make a positive impact. It's realizing that we're not just bystanders, we can be part of the solution.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding. The more we learn about the Middle East, the more we understand the different perspectives and experiences of the people there, the better equipped we are to contribute to real change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Middle East, I think the big takeaway is this. It's a region facing enormous challenges, but it's also full of resilience, hope, and potential. And while the future is uncertain, we can all play a part in building a more peaceful and just world. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never give up hope.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Echoes of Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who loves exploring big ideas. Together, let's keep the conversation going. See you next time.